everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I see it's quite a packed room, and I assume AI is on everyone's minds today, and for good reason. It's dominating the global tech narrative. AI isn't new, but it's now everywhere. From classrooms to call centers, governments to global supply chains, it's reshaping how everyone in this region works and competes. But I think the big question that we want to unpack here today is that where is AI really delivering results and making real impact? So I'm so honored to introduce my three panelists here. We have James from OpenAI, Eunice from Google, and Annabel from Amazon Web Services. Three people who sit at the heart of this AI conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Now, I'd like to start a little bit broader, and I think, James, let's begin with you. I think you've mentioned you're bullish on ASEAN for ASEAN. That's a big statement, so we can dive into it here a little bit. Three things. What does that mean for you? What do you see? How do you see that play out in this region? And thirdly, also, does OpenAI make money in ASEAN?
Yeah, ASEAN is such a dynamic region, and as we think about what it takes as we sort of sit on the precipice of what we like to call the intelligence age, what's really going to drive, I think, a lot of economic activity, productivity, just new advancements in the ways that we think and see the world, are countries and regions that have chips, energy, data, talent. And you can think of those inputs as just a key part of the compute infrastructure of the future and the productivity infrastructure of the future. And I think here in ASEAN, you have so much of that dynamic talent and populations, energy resources. And so many of the conversations that have been going on this week, I think, really are an entry point to really propelling the individual countries and the regional economy forward. And it's great to sort of see and hear about all of the collaboration that is going to happen in sort of advancing that vision. So the region is extremely well poised, I think, to really be a driver of what's next in the intelligence age.
That's so exciting to hear. And Annabel, I'd like to jump to you next. AWS works with thousands and thousands of enterprise customers, right? Which markets in this region or even in APAC are successful or challenging for you? What works, what doesn't work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And look, I think ASEAN is still the fastest growing region for us globally in terms of cloud adoption and cloud adoption growth. And if I just think about the AI opportunity in ASEAN, by 2030, ASEAN is poised to be able to grow about $1 trillion in its economy from effective adoption and deployment of AI services across this entire region. I think it's with that in view that AWS has made some significant investments over the last few years across Southeast Asia, at least $12 billion already to date. And in the last, I would say, 3 years, we've made additional region infrastructure investments. These are our flagship infrastructure investments in 3 additional countries in ASEAN after our first investment in Singapore. And each of these investments are commitments between $5 to $6 billion So that's just cloud infrastructure. And I mean, from our perspective, cloud infrastructure is the enabling infrastructure for AI. I mean, I know there are a lot of governments across the region thinking about what their AI strategy should be. You've heard some probably talk about sovereign AI stacks and putting hundreds of millions of dollars into these stacks. But for the vast majority of companies, cloud infrastructure and the scale that cloud infrastructure is able to offer, that's the way in which you build your AI stack, you build your AI applications. We offer language models everywhere. So we're very, very excited about the opportunity. And I think it's very, very nascent, I think, right now. Governments across this region, and I say that across APJ, are thinking about how to dance, I feel, with AI, both from an actual adoption perspective, but also from a regulation perspective. And so when I think about regulation, I sometimes worry about the pace at which governments try to put out and implement regulation. Responsible AI and the use of AI responsibly is critical to every economy to build trust with the population. But I would always caution a little bit of wait and see and think about high-risk applications and focusing on those first rather than doing anything too broad. And so I think we see two countries across APJ moving fast on AI regulation. The first is Korea. The second is Vietnam. Vietnam is currently debating a law. And I think we've provided this advice to these two countries as well. Be very clear about what you're trying to achieve from AI regulation. Start in a focused way rather than overbroad. And remember to focus on encouraging innovation as much as kind of thinking about regulating. So, and they're listening. So I think we're very, very excited about APJ as a region. And I think the overall, the sentiment towards technology adoption, the excitement about it, it's something that we see quite distinct from some other regions in the world as well. So we're very, very excited about the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. I mean, two big pillars, right? Having investing into the infrastructure which democratizes this technology, as well as shaping policy and regulation with governments to make it safe for all. Eunice, I'd like to jump to you. Google works very, very closely with governments on AI policy across APAC. What are some best practices you're seeing, and what are some maybe pitfalls governments should avoid?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think in Asia, my job, I sit in a role where I have colleagues from all over the world looking at AI regulation and policy across the world. And often I say that actually my job is great because many of the governments in this region are very inherently pro-innovation. They understand intuitively the opportunity of AI. They know that this is going to be transformative. They know that if they harness it well, it's going to help them, sort of leapfrog, help the economies move on and grow and develop. So the AI policy landscape in Asia, I would say, is generally quite positive, pro-innovation. However, like as Annabel said, I think countries are also starting to see, okay, what can I do to protect my citizens, right, while enabling this opportunity? And so for this, we see governments slowly coming into, the phase where they think about how to regulate and how best to regulate. So the advice that we always give to them is actually, it's not true that AI is not regulated. If you think about it, AI is already regulated under existing laws in many areas. If a chatbot spits out your personal information, many countries have privacy laws that can already be utilized to act against this, right? The same for consumer protection laws, the same for cybersecurity laws. So start from your baseline of laws, see where the gaps are, see where you need to add additional clarity or guidance, and then do that top up, right? So that's one. The second, as Annabel raised, is also we take a risk-based approach towards AI regulation, right? Not all AI applications have the same level of risk, right? Chatbot that really does scheduling really is very, very different from an AI application that diagnoses cancer, right? So you really should be focusing on the highest risk applications and seeing where the controls should be, what the transparency mechanism should be, what the compliance mechanism should be on that. And then also the last thing is really a balanced and aligned framework where you balance between the risk and opportunity, right? So if you regulate too tightly, you're going to forego a lot of the very beneficial applications of AI. But then if you're too loose, then you don't tackle some of the potential risk. And then lastly, it's about international interoperability, which is really, really important, right? Where there are international standards, ISO standards, for example, lean on them. Where there are regional standards like ASEAN has developed, the ASEAN Guide on AI governance and ethics, look to that as a baseline for your economy and then see how you want to go from there.
All right, thank you. Annabel, I'd like to jump to you for a little moment because I think we've talked about agnostic regulation before, whereby different technologies, it's good to apply consistent principles across technology to regulate it. Which is a little bit different from what Eunice just mentioned, right? Looking at high risk versus low risk tech. Well, what are your thoughts about this? How do you compare and contrast, or just group it together?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I don't see these two as actually like sort of opposite. In fact, I do think they are one and the same. As a, and I used to be a government regulator as well, writing policy. And as a policymaker, one of the most critical things you're thinking about when you're drafting policy is ensuring that your policy is going to apply in a consistent principle, regardless of what technology era you are. So I used to work in a telco regulator, and as we were thinking about policies around telcos, we wanted to make sure that it didn't matter whether it was like 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G technology, where we are today, that whatever we wrote down was still going to be a consistent set of principles. You might have to update your interpretations because of that new technology, but it's consistent principles. And I think it is the same here. I think risk-based regulation is something that is a principle that many governments think about when they are putting out regulation. Regulation ultimately exists for policy motive and being very clear on what those policy objectives are, and then working backwards from that as you draft regulation to ensure that you're taking, I guess, an approach that minimizes the amount of intervention that you're making as a government. And that's important because every time you make a policy intervention, there will be knock-on impacts. Some you won't necessarily be able to anticipate, certainly in the future, but even sometimes in the present. So I see these as actually very, very consistent. And I see many governments in Southeast Asia actually fully understanding and aligning along those principles. We were very heartened to see the conclusion and the announcement of ASEAN's AI Safety Institute. I think that's a brilliant framework and approach to be able to address practical safety implications of AI. And that's part of a broader global conversation. And now the ASEAN countries have a formal platform in which to engage with other countries and make sure that they're also advocating a point of view that makes sense for Southeast Asia. And for many of the middle-income countries in Southeast Asia, I think it's so critical to have that voice. Because obviously sometimes a lot of these conversations are being led by more advanced economies, which are in a different state, both with a regulation perspective, but also obviously in terms of economic growth and focus principles of their own population as well.
Yeah, it does seem like ASEAN is taking a very different approach in trying to come together and develop a more collaborative and cohesive framework towards AI. Something that has been also coming across my plate is this concept of sovereign AI, which I think, James, you've also talked about many times. OpenAI has been engaging regulators not only in Asia, but across the world, right? Everyone's super excited about the company. So how do you view this emerging concept of sovereign AI, having to juggle so many different, stakeholders and governments? What are the opportunities or risks, or just how do you navigate this space?
So we recently, announced our OpenAI for Countries program, I think, to get exactly at this question of, how do you begin to strike the types of partnerships, build the types of tooling, and really allow for countries to set their destiny in sort of a way that feels, custom and local. And so we've been in conversations all around the world. And I mentioned, the sort of chips, energy, data, talent, that construct with countries about what are the, homegrown resources, who are the domestic partners that need to come together in sort of building infrastructure. We have a bit of a saying, like, infrastructure is destiny. And it's important that, countries really develop that domestic capacity that they're sort of projecting forward, not just, sort of short and the medium term, but looking out, where are these uses going? What are the domestic priorities in areas like health and education and disaster relief? And in bringing together, whether it's energy partners, data center providers, even just some of the leading electronics and other manufacturers. These are some of the conversations that we have, but we think countries, whether we're at the table or not, that these are really top priorities for setting the terms of debate. And it allows countries to really customize, whether on language or on advanced uses that are a real domestic superpower, to be able to carve out their own sort of industrial and national priorities. So we're excited to be in those conversations and help, nations around the world advance their thinking on the types of AI that they want.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a philosophical way to put it also, like infrastructure is destiny. I think that it gives us a lot of food for thought. And actually, I'd like to also bring up the question of, the US-China kind of tension, given that we are at the ASEAN summit. Maybe Annabel could take this question a little bit. How is AWS kind of navigating that space? It sits between US and China, and specifically in this region, are you seeing or are you cautious about Chinese firms, say, using AWS for AI-related work?
I mean, first of all, I think there's a full acknowledgement that AI is at the center of geopolitics. I think that's been, so much of the conversation that's been going on maybe for a couple of years now, because I think there's full recognition that this is the next stage of technology. Now, at AWS, we focus first and foremost on our customers. So these are the businesses that we service. And obviously, we will do whatever we need to comply with the laws that we are subject to. And that includes from the US government, but it also includes domestic governments all across the world. So whenever we serve our customers in any country in the world, it's very clear in our terms of service that if they're using our services in violation of a law, we have the right to stop offering them that service. And I think it's no different here. But beyond that, I think AI is a democratized opportunity for everyone. And as a key service provider, we make sure that we enable and provide that broad flexibility for our customers to be able to continue to access our services. That's our key priority, and that's something that we will always work towards, regardless of whether it's laws related to AI or laws related to data or laws related to other kinds of data flow issues as well. So it's a fairly consistent approach that we've taken. I did want to pick up a little bit on this concept of different and new models of AI infrastructure as well, and sovereignty that I think you mentioned, Olivia, and I know we've just discussed. And in particular, I think it's very, very important, as I think there's a lot of hype language around AI sovereignty and AI digital infrastructure. I always say pare it back to what you're actually trying to achieve and what makes sense. And this conversation is not a new one. We've spent a lot of time with our customers talking about when does it make sense to leverage hyperscale cloud, and when does it continue to make sense for you to leverage some kind of on-premise or your own data center. So I think that concept probably does apply as well very much with AI. The key difference, of course, being that AI does require a lot of additional compute power, and depending on what you're trying to do, you may actually need a very, very significant scale, right? And I think, obviously, at the software layer, what OpenAI has done with large language models has been huge leaps in terms of that efficiency. But still, at the end of the day, there are certain things, if you want to do it, that you do need that scale. And so I think understanding when you think about, let's say, nation-state self-determination when it comes around to AI, what does that actually mean to you? What are the actual workloads that you're trying to build? What are your concerns? What are the scenarios you're worried about? And then thinking about resiliency very holistically and deciding where you would put your always finite budget to spend on AI and what model makes the most sense for you as a result of that. So we've argued for, and I stand by the fact that flexibility is the most important thing here. When you're putting out regulation, don't just marry yourself to one approach. Think about how you actually want many approaches in different situations.
Eunice, is that what you are advocating as well with Google? I mean, flexibility or collaboration? I'm sure they all come together.
Yes, they do. But maybe just a little bit about this whole sovereign AI debate. I think completely agree with Annabel that it's a hype word, right? It's very expedient to use that word, but it really means different things to different people. And I think it's really helpful to double click on what exactly do you mean when you talk about sovereign AI. Are you pursuing sovereign AI because you feel that your local languages, your local cultures are not sufficiently reflected in the mostly sort of Western US company developed models? Do you feel that you need to have control over the full stack? And if you do, then there are trade-offs, because it's very, very expensive to be able to do that and to localize everything on-prem. So, the UK, for example, when they talk about sovereign AI, they talk about how they want to make the most of the AI opportunity for themselves. They talk about developing local talent. They talk about, pursuing broad adoption of AI. When Singapore talks about, developing their own Southeast Asian language model, it's really to solve for that piece, that, they don't feel that existing LLMs reflect sufficiently, local nuances, right, in Indonesian or in Tetum, right, the newest member of ASEAN. So that's coming from different places. So I think we need to be very clear when we talk about concepts like AI sovereignty. What exactly are you trying to solve? And then what is the best way to solve that without putting down very, very blunt regulatory solutions?
If I could just add, I think what's so true about what you both said, and I think something that stands out in conversations that we have with governments, is really being clear about the types of trade-offs that you've just described, being specific about the types of use cases, and every country is going to make its own choices, about the infrastructure, about the rules of the road, about its societal norms and artificial intelligence, and that's every country's right, and everyone should make those choices. But I think one of the things that we can sometimes do as companies, as policy teams, is really just be clear about some of the technical trade-offs, of sort of where different decisions, will make for outcomes that may not or may be possible technically, economically, based on those. So I think keeping those trade-offs top of mind, it's important in the national debates that we have as we talk about sort of where we're going to anchor our different economies. I think that's a real key, and it should be grounded in the specifics, as both of you have teed up.
Right, so there's just like lots of things to consider, lots of trade-offs, lots of nuances. I think OpenAI has been quite vocal about, ensuring about how it's ensuring its models reflect local languages and cultures, right? You guys have talked a lot about it. How, maybe you could share a little bit about how are you ensuring these models reflect the diversity of, let's say, the ASEAN languages, cultures, or even just people?
Well, first, that really starts with just the tremendous growth that we've seen in ASEAN. So I think over the last year, we've seen a 3x growth in sort of the users on our tools. And once that begins to happen and developers are using our tools, you see amazing uses in government and by the commercial sector. That really ups our understanding of how our models are performing on languages. We spend a lot of time trying to get real-time feedback across ASEAN and around the world. Where are we coming short? And there are teams, both from our clients, from our free users, who are giving us feedback all the time of sort of where we're performing well and where we have a lot of work to do. And we get that in real time from our amazing partners and commercial clients. We have a partnership with Grab, that works on sort of accessibility and language understanding in their tools. And actually, I think just saw that here in Malaysia, a physician that was working with the Ministry of Health just actually published the first peer-reviewed paper, using ChatGPT 4.0. And so again, you're seeing these specialized uses here in the region. I think that's the starting point, is as you see the growth accelerate, as developers use our tools and give us real-time feedback, that we sort of continue to improve our models, and we get that real-time feedback and take it really seriously in how we improve both the performance for everyday users, as well as for our sort of enterprise and commercial clients who are similarly, letting us know where are we doing well and where do we have work to do, and that's a really important part of our product cycle.
Yeah, these are such important, concepts and things to grasp. I mean, all of you are working very closely with governments and policymakers, everyone, all the stakeholders, right? I was just wondering, because everyone's a business after all, on the topic of monetization, where are we for AI? Where are we on that scale? Are we at the beginning stages, middle? How are you guys navigating this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a range, right? I think we have 800 million, users around the world, and 5 million paid businesses who are using our tools. And so I think you see individual users who are, getting hours back in their day. We have partnerships with governments around the world and, different NGOs that show just the number of hours that are saved. We have a partnership with the United States with the American Federation of Teachers to train hundreds of thousands of teachers over the next few years. And as we've done some of the economic study, of sort of how many, the amount of time that professionals are able to put back in to their core work by, say, automating some of the tasks that they do. I mean, that's a version of monetization. It doesn't, sort of always show up in sort of the national statistics, but we think that's a really important part. Creators who are speeding up the brainstorming process and the ability to prototype ideas, individual developers and entrepreneurs. And so you multiply that by all the sectors, and whether you look at sort of the paid customers that we have or just all of the users around the world, the majority of our users use the tool for free. And from what we hear from them, it's giving them time back, it's helping them do their jobs. Students and young people, I think here in ASEAN, our number one user group is sort of young people from like 18 to 24 who are studying and enhancing their work. And so you think about the productivity challenges that all of our economies are up against, and as we look, like, where are these breakthroughs, where are they going to come from? We think these tools are a really powerful accelerant. And so anecdotally, we hear that this is really helping, individual professionals, entrepreneurs accelerate their work, get new business, do more quickly. And I think soon we will see much more of that in some of the aggregate statistics.
Yeah, and I do think you've brought up such important points about training and AI and talent, right? But before we go into that, I'd just like to follow up a little bit because it's something that's been on the news recently. I think OpenAI has always been, at the forefront of, pushing generative AI to the masses. Recently, many different ways to monetize, right? And one thing that caught my eye recently, I think your CEO, Sam Altman, tweeted that, they're now going to allow erotica content for verified adult users. How do you think about where to draw the line?
I think the key principle there is, one of the things we've tried to embody at OpenAI is, saying we want to be responsive to what the world is asking for in our products and really give autonomy in the use. And so, principle we have is sort of, in our services, we're going to let adults be adults. And we know there are plenty of safeguards that we have to put in place to get to that place. So I think, what the sentiment that he was trying to express there is that we are working toward that type of product experience, and we have, again, a lot of safeguards to put in place to make sure that we can verify that someone is an adult. Otherwise, people will be defaulted into sort of a much sort of safer, in the user ratings parlance in the US, sort of a PG-13 experience. But really trying, again, to be responsive to what our users and developers are sort of saying they want. And that's an evolving process. We really, it's important for us to listen, to understand what the world wants from our tools, and then try to use our iterative process to sort of make some of the updates to allow for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that. So now let's move into talent, right, which is like a big part of this AI topic. Everyone talks about AI talent, but not just in engineers and whatnot, but also looking at policymakers who understand what questions to ask about procurement, ethics, deployment, et cetera, et cetera. Eunice, maybe I can come to you first. Google has done a lot around tech for good initiatives, especially in education and inclusion. Could you maybe share some examples whereby public-private collaboration has made a measurable impact for the region?
Yeah, I think, what gets me really most excited about AI and, with this tech for good theme is really not chatbots or, sort of productivity tools. I mean, those are really important and they're used in good ways. But it's really, using AI for societal change, for scientific discovery. So one of the proudest projects, I think, as a Googler, I am super proud of this thing called AlphaFold. I don't know if you guys have heard of AlphaFold. AlphaFold is basically a project where Google DeepMind has embarked on, okay, so to understand the human body, you need to first understand proteins, and you need to understand how proteins fold in a 3D manner. It used to take one PhD student 6 years, one PhD, to fold one protein. Okay, there are about 200 million proteins in the human body. AlphaFold folded all 200 million proteins in 3D form in months. And we've made AlphaFold available to openly, to scientists, to researchers, and you can imagine, the implications of that for society. I have a 6-year-old daughter. I'm very, very excited about what this means for her future, what this means for personalized medicine, what this means for cancer treatments, what this means for plastics, right? You need to break down plastics to be able to try to address the climate change sustainability problem. So really, even in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, we're seeing a lot of usage of AlphaFold. 85,000 researchers from across the region are using AlphaFold database to do their own research. And when we talk about talent using AI for very, very productive, very, very significant societal innovations and experiments, I think that's really, really going to change how our children live in the world. Right here in Malaysia, we had this scientist from the UKM, Malaysia, Dr. Sudat, who is using AlphaFold to, I can't remember the name of the bacteria. I think it's Melioidosis or something. But basically, it's a bacteria that is very, very, is more deadly than dengue. And he's doing research to understand that bacteria and to try to understand and then find a cure for it. So right here in Malaysia, right, you have scientists using these kind of applications because of AI to really impact society at large, not just for Malaysia, but for the world.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so cool. I mean, Annabel, if I can come to you, I think AWS also runs like lots of upskilling programs, very large-scale stuff, cloud literacy programs. What works and what gaps are you seeing? If you may.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think Eunice's example was so amazing when you think about particularly how AI can be applied in very deep research. But we want to make sure when we work with governments that we're addressing every layer of the economy, right? And that students in schools, so, like through to K-12, obviously tertiary level education, technical skill sets and also non-technical skill sets, right? And so part of what we're doing, so like for example in Malaysia, we've trained over 200,000 people, and we'll see very similar numbers across many ASEAN countries. In Indonesia, we trained over 1 million people in cloud skills, and that's certified cloud practitioner skill set. So if you're a certified cloud practitioner, that in theory enables you to actually go out there and start building with our applications. And that of course includes AI applications as well. And these are very, very critical skill sets for people who are sort of at the boundaries, well, certainly a first step if you want a more technical career in being able to build on the cloud, but it's also really critical at the boundaries of non-technical and technical. Because that's when you start to understand, not just as a consumer, although I think what ChatGPT has done is amazing, right? And I think that has introduced AI to every single consumer. I often think about that as sort of the same revolution that we faced with the mobile internet, right? So that kind of accessibility. But certainly beyond just being a consumer using ChatGPT application, actually then going one step further and being able to build applications that you can potentially monetize into a new business model, into an innovative service. That's basically creating your next generation of entrepreneurs, of new business cases. If you're a government, you could be solving some very challenging citizen engagement problems. And that's what we're seeing at scale happen. So I think there are lots of opportunities to do that. I am actually very optimistic about AI skilling. And I know it's going to be a process, and we're going to have to work with governments everywhere to make sure we get as many of those programs out there to as many people. Mm-hmm. We want to think about inclusivity. We want to make sure that marginalized communities or underrepresented communities are going to be trained as well. But once we're done with all of that, it's like that's the revolution. And what the mobile phone did for connecting underserved communities, and that leapfrog. I see the same thing with AI, but for generations of new entrepreneurs. So I think I have a 2-year-old son. I'm telling him, in my mind, I'm like, don't even worry too much about academia. We don't know what the world is going to look like in 20 years. But more importantly, like, have that agility to pick up new skill sets, because I think that's the future that we're in.
Yeah, well, that would be such a good thing to hear as a child. so well put. We're running out of time, but I'd like to ask you each just one last question before we wrap. In a few words, in one sentence, what's the single most important thing you think ASEAN must get right for AI to deliver lasting impact? James, maybe you'd like to start?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll go back to the one line I mentioned earlier, which is, infrastructure is destiny, and the importance of working together as a region, as individual countries, and, of course, more broadly as a world, on sort of putting in place the infrastructure that's going to be needed so that the benefits of the intelligence age are shared broadly by all of our communities.
I think for me, maybe occupational hazard, but I think that the foundational policies and regulations need to be right, need to be pro-innovation in nature, need to enable all the opportunities that we spoke about during this panel, and to really find something that is fit for purpose for your country, right? Drawing on best practices that you can bring in from the region, because I think the choices that you make on policy today, on how you regulate your economy with regard to AI, is really going to determine your pathway for tomorrow.
And I agree with both the speakers, and would say maybe add one more to it, which is think about at the ASEAN level consistency, interoperability on policy, on supporting digital infrastructure investment, because ultimately the opportunities not only for any individual ASEAN country, but it's for the region as a whole. And we've got such many different skill sets and strengths and weaknesses across different countries. So we should be working together as a whole region to make sure that we're going to be able to provide the best value proposition to the rest of the world. And so that ASEAN companies and countries can continue to grow their economies as a whole. Right,
exactly. So well put. For me, if there's one takeaway I'd like all of you to have today, is that, in ASEAN, it's AI's future here wouldn't just be written by algorithms. It'll be written by the partnerships, the policy, and the people we're building for. Thank you all for joining us today.